Shabbat Shalom. Here we are in the midst of all this chaos in the world with sickness and in health, for better and for worse, with war and peace. And we need to find the line and the hand and the direction in our lives to know where and how to go forward. That's a very important thing to do. In times of peace it's different than in times of chaos, but one word that really does it for I think a lot of us is the word hope. All people live on hope as the fuel of our lives. No hope, no life. No hope, no future. Every human being needs hope, and I believe that it's possible and necessary at least to have hope as the frame on which we build our future. Hope, not our wounds, not our hurts. It's an important thing to remember. Some people live with their hurts. They have made peace with their hurts and their wounds, and it's one thing to live with it and to cope with it. But our future should not be determined by it. Hope should. Hope for things that you would really like to take place in your life. Looking at the Bible, we can do this from different points of view. If we are in trouble, the Bible looks and reads different from when we are in peace. If we are in a jail situation or in a concentration camp situation like in China with the Uyghurs, it's a different situation than we are on the beach celebrating vacation and stuff like that. And although the Bible is allowing us to read it and to say do the best with it for your life, we need to realize that the Bible has some important realistic features when you read it and look at it that covers ground also when things are not so good in our lives. Taken from that point, shall I say, the Bible doesn't start on a very hopeful note. It says in the beginning, but let's before I continue, let me start with reading the first text in the Bible, the text that Moses has given us in the book of Numbers, the new fourth part of the five-part volume of the Torah, the law of Moses, as it's called sometimes, is now at hand. So we're going to read it, and here it goes. Adonai, God, said to Moses, "Number all the firstborn males of the children of Israel, from a month old and upward, and take the number of their names. You must take the Levites for me. I am Adonai, instead of all the firstborn among the children of Israel. Also the livestock of the Levites, instead of all the firstborn among the livestock of the children of Israel." And so Moses numbered as Adonai commanded him all the firstborn among the children of Israel, all the firstborn males according to the number of names, from a month old and upward. Of those who were numbered of them, they together counted 22,273. So in the beginning, the Bible starts with that God creates heaven and earth. That sounds hopeful, but it is a product. Now let's look at that product. The second sentence in the Bible says that the earth was empty and void. A pessimist would say that's a bad beginning. My boss would fire me if I showed him this kind of result. The optimist, he would say, don't look at the past, look at the future. My boss would fire me if I constantly turn my head wherever I go, even especially when I enter the office of the boss, and I constantly look back. The realist says all beginning is difficult, not for God, but for us people. So we need to build our existence on earth from the beginning and by growing insight. And my boss, says the realist, says, as long there is development, we can fail, but failures are there to be solved. And that is the development that we see happening and taking place in the Bible. But this is the beginning. Let's look at that and stand still at that and realize that this is how God chose it to begin. And that development then we see as well. Then you see the development, otherwise you don't see it. In the second Bible book, the name of that second book in Hebrew is called Names, Shemot, from the single word Shem. Names means naming, means, and you see it also in the text today, count and take the number of their names. Names in Hebrew. Giving names to matters in order to recognize them, in order to heal, and have a word that we can use in order to find the remedy. When it talks about when we're dealing with a diagnosis that we need for a sick person. The Dutch, or the English, shall I say, the Dutch is my language, but the English title of the second book of the Bible is Exodus. That is the leaving of Egypt, which sounds like a solution. We were in Egypt and we were able to leave. And it sounds wonderful. So everybody is, yay, we're leaving Egypt. But realize that when you walk in that crowd, you need to see and around you in your imagination what an exhaustion and hunger and thirst and being tired goes along with that. It's not easy. Then the third book is called He Called in Hebrew. Our attention is called for. God asks for our attention. After those two starting points, God asks for attention. What is he asking for? Look at the Dutch, I'm saying Dutch again, look at the English title, which is Leviticus, talking about priesthood. Especially in the difficult beginning or difficult situations in our lives, the calling of God needs to be worked out. It is better in difficult situations to be a priest and to live a noble life than to just go with the flow in wherever you go. And you might say, well, I don't have such a difficult situation in my life. Well, that might be. It might be that you are in a more difficult situation when you are a Syrian refugee or a prisoner in an Iranian or a Russian prison, or being a captive in a Chinese concentration camp. But you might have trouble with your spiritual growth and with how to work out suffering that takes place in your life. That might be a little bit more removed from your daily existence than with other people. Today, as I said, is the fourth of the 5 Bible books that started, and it's called in Hebrew Bamidbar, which is in English in the desert. That's an interesting situation also, the fourth of the 4 situations that I'm describing. The pessimist, what will the pessimist say? He will say, we didn't develop much. We're still in the desert. The optimist will say, close your eyes, then it's okay. The realist will say, each Bible book shows its own challenges. And evidently that's what we need in order to grow. Grow in the desert. Some people talk about the desert as a beautiful place. God can talk to you in the silence. It's so beautiful. You can meditate. You can do all these things. No, you die in a desert. That's what happens. It's a very dangerous place. Deserts and oceans are beautiful, romantic, and deadly if you are there unprepared. What you need in those places is the help, the support of God necessary in order to make it to the end of that temporary situation. Without all the dispersion, all the things that take place around you in the cultivated, in the livable world, um, with all these things that take our attention, um, without it, in those silent places, deadly silent places, God may have more opportunity to reach us, like in the desert or on the ocean. So translate that in our lives right now, those 4 situations. The first one was in Genesis. The earth was void, empty. Is there emptiness? Is there void in your life? Or was it, or has it been, or still is? It looks like it's necessary that your life begins like that. It might be that God says, this is the way it goes. You go from rags to riches. But I don't mean that in an economic way. You go from difficult to easy. That void looks like it had to be there. But when we realize that it had to be there, it's also the beginning of success. Never give up on the thought of reaching success. Realize that already early in the book of the Bible, the promise of salvation, of saving, of liberating by Messiah is sounding. The sound is sounding. Is you can hear it. It's vaguely there, not really clear, but it is there. When you read in Genesis 3 verse 15, it's on the screen as well. I will put, says God, to the serpent, enmity, hostility, enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will crack your head, her offspring, and you will only bruise his heel. That's hope. As I started to say, that hope is the fuel of our lives. That's hope. This text is giving hope. It's future, but it's hope. The second book, how does that apply in our lives? Exodus, naming things is really giving a label in order to be able to do something with it. If you don't do it, you might forget it. If you walk in a forest and you see animals and you see flowers, you need to know that you have a name for the animals and the flowers. It's necessary in order to survive, in order to protect yourself from the dangerous ones. And that means order. That means being able to survive, and more than that. It's giving you the possibility to look for a solution if there has been a problem. Naming matters in order to recognize them, in order to be healed when it talks about when you need a diagnosis, in order to close situations in your life that have taken place, that were not so nice. That is hopeful. So also there is this in this book. This second book, there is the name calling in the good sense, and you can say, well, that's a positive thing. Yes, that's true, but we need to learn to name things in our lives. The third book, he calls us, he calls you, he calls us to be priests. That means, what does priest mean? Well, the basic attitude of a priest is to take into account the interest of other people, of the group to which you belong, or a family unit to which you belong, taking into consideration as the interest of the other people. The more priests of this kind of noble sort, the more hope for peace and security will be there. And then the fourth book, in the desert. If we live in a barren period in our lives, we need to take care that we won't become negative and sour. The indispensable undergirding of the Lord is very necessary to go through it, to get through it as good as possible. And God is able to reach us in those times if we let Him, We need to be open for that. We need to realize that anything we really receive comes from heaven, because heaven will make us receptive. It's also a Bible text that says that. We'll come to it. So meet the Lord in the desert, and you will meet hope. If you don't meet the Lord in your desert, it might mean death, in a sense, or literally. Life under Moshe, under Moses, has been very, very heavy. Already in this fourth book, there are 3 very grave situations. The period in chapter 1 through 10, the period in the wilderness around the desert of Sinai, the Sinai desert. And then the second one, from Sinai to what's called Kadesh Barnea, from chapter 11 through chapter 20. Another desert place, from desert to desert. It's not hopeful. Not hopeful if you go through it. And the third one as well, from Kadesh Barnea to the plains of Moab, where Moses would die in the end, in the chapters 20 through 36. For Abraham, before him, it was difficult also, because he had a calling, and calling means that you are limited yourself. You have a focus, you have a goal, and you live for it, and you're called for it, you're committed to it, and so there are priorities that have to do with this calling. I wish we all have a calling, because it will mean a lot. You have something to live for. It's a destiny. May the calling be from the Lord. But it has its heavy difficulties. It meant for Abraham to leave his family, to leave his people, and to go to an unknown land, to become the unknown person. But he made it in the Bible. To serve the unknown God that he got to know. God who would give the teaching, and the God who became known because of the teaching of Abraham, as it is in the Bible. Under Moshe it was even more heavier, because not only for Moses himself, but all of the people around him had to go through what he was teaching. They all were about to change, whether they wanted or not. Moses stayed away for 40 days. Camping on Mount Sinai. That was heavy, because he was indispensable. He had made himself indispensable, in the good sense, with all his care, all his teaching, but also problematic when he was away, even for more than a month. On Mount Sinai, Moses learned the heavenly situations, heavenly matters, heavenly insights. He was an earthly man, but he learned the heavenly situations from the Lord himself. And rabbis think that it must have been Messiah, who is called God in those places, but only as Messiah is it for God possible to come to earth and to do these things, to have a hand to cover Moses on that mountain. The heavy stuff for Israel was that it had to go through this as well. Moses had the help of being there with God and receiving more insight. For Israel it was a matter of hearing, accepting, and then applying. For the first time, humankind got insight in what happens in heaven. Very interesting, but it is a much demanding situation for all of us to get used to this, and then to find the hope in these words, which is very important in order to make it. Aiming at salvation of humankind, aiming at worshipping God, because he's the one who's saving us. The heavy thing was also the fact that the visitation of God, or the visit to us on earth, was short-lived, but there was no more real experience of God on earth than this visit from God on this Mount Sinai. It didn't exist, doesn't exist. This is why Israel had to repeat this heavenly visit. How does it do that? By having our synagogues now, but from the beginning, originally, by this earthly tent of coming together, Moses and God, later on the temple, there was this repetition of this visit of God who would speak through Moses and through Moses to the people. And this tent, this desert tent, Mishkan, to build it up, to break it down and to transport it, was something of a learning process for Israel to know that it's not some romantic thing, but it's hard work. Hard work, like soldiers of Israel are doing hard work in order to get back the peace that is so precious. Not getting jealous for those who were closer, who were allowed to build up this sanctuary. Not being jealous at the priests that were able to serve in the sanctuary because they were smaller in amount than the rest of the population. The golden calf was not a good thing to have done, but it was a means for the Levites in order to get their position in the end. They did not go for the nice, attractive, golden image. They were the evidence that there's a difference between people. And if you look at the text that we just read in Numbers 3 verse 40 through 43, you see that it is the Levites who take the place of the firstborn. What does that teach us? It's teaching us to go for the position of spiritual firstborn, like Adam and Jacob and his brother Esau, like several situations in the Bible also with women where the youngest one, the not firstborn, becomes the firstborn in the position of the spiritual firstborn. That is what you read here in Numbers 3. And it is a heavy hint to have this same situation for yourself as well. Not the firstborn of the family, and you might know what I mean when I say that the physical, earthly firstborns in families are the ones who get the responsibility for inheritance and for making big decisions and stuff like that. Yet, spiritually speaking, the spiritual firstborns are the ones who build up this relationship, this one-to-one, instead of inheriting this situation of a relationship like children who are being brought from home to the congregation, to the synagogue, to the church. They are lending, they're using the faith of their parents and growing into it. But there has to be a moment in your life where you make a personal decision to get this personal relationship between God and you. That's what spiritual firstborn means. And these Levites made the right decision. It's not just a nice position, it's also your choices that you make, the words that you say or don't say anymore. They were the evidence that there is a difference between people, and good choice and bad choice. There's a level difference in spiritual content in people. For those, the difference between those who easily step into another congregation because it doesn't matter to them, and others who say, no, I realize that there is something special going on somewhere. I go for the special, not for just the easy. Golden calf was a solution, but a wrong solution. The people who built it thought, this is our God. We make him visible. And because no one knows how God looks like, this could be the right image. But it wasn't the right image. It's a strict situation with God. So what the Torah, what the Bible is teaching us is there are things that are very important. We need to learn to be depending on God. He gives, we thank him, we learn to see what he gives, so we can learn to thank him for the things that take place in our lives. We need to learn to recognize that. We worship him, we obey him, we serve him, but also Messiah. We need to learn that God comes to earth in the shape of a human being, God on earth. Learn to recognize him. No, he's not a golden calf that cannot do anything. He's a Torah faithful, grace teaching human being, recognizable as God, but perhaps not so in your expectation as you might want it. There's lots of people who look at Yeshua like Jesus in the Bible, and they rebuild him a little, remodel him a little bit, because it's easier for them to say that he is the New Testament Messiah, and therefore no law and no prophets anymore and stuff like that. Get used to it. It's Yeshua that was promised by Moses as Messiah, and that means that he is close with Torah, with the law, and close to grace, and close to the image of what was promised in Genesis chapter 3 verse 50, which we read in the beginning. Moses was an image of Messiah, in a sense, if you want. He wasn't the Messiah, but he was an image of, to learn to recognize him. Moses is the one who announces the coming of Messiah. Read with me Deuteronomy chapter 18 verse 15. There it says, Adonai your God will raise up to you a prophet from the midst of you, of your brothers, like me, says Moses. Listen to him. God, in verse 18, repeats that, and he says, I will raise a prophet for them from among their brothers, like you, Moses. It's a human being, this Messiah. It's not a golden calf, but it's a human being. But like Moses, so close to the law of Moses. And I will put my words in his mouth. He will speak to them all that I shall command him. This is what we need to realize. Compare that with the words of Yeshua in John chapter 12, verse 49. He says, I spoke not from myself. The Father who sent me. Just in line with what we read in Deuteronomy 18, verse 15 and 18. The Father who sent me, he gave me a commandment, what I should say and what I should speak. And a little bit further on in John chapter 14, verse 10, don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father in me? The words that I speak to you, I speak not from myself, but the Father who lives in me does his works. Interesting words, how the Father lives in him, but that's how it goes. He's the image, he is God himself, but then in bodily form, in human, earthly, bodily form. A special command, a special order in order to make something visible that is in heaven, is the order to make the four formations, army formations, which you can read in chapter 2 of this book of Numbers. And to make it short, there are four formations with their banners. In the east there is Judah, which is the symbol of the Torah of Moses, with an animal image, together with two tribes, Issachar and Torah, and Zebulun, riches. Then in the south, the east is the biblical north. Then in the south there is Reuben, Reuven, something like sea, the sun. There is a whole story behind that, but that won't go into that now. With two tribes, Gad, meaning power, strength, and Shimon, meaning reconciliation. And the Reuven is sorrow, and that's that. Something like a combination of human being and son. And I say this in a short while. I'll talk about the four animals that the prophet Ezekiel talks about, because there is a very interesting parallel in these things. What Israel has seen in these four tribes on earth, Ezekiel has seen in heaven as a confirmation that there is something very interesting going on in the heavenly places. In the west there was the head tribe Ephraim, power, strength, with the animal being an oxen, with Manasseh also an oxen, and an ox, and then Benjamin a wolf. And in the north, the tribe of Dan, serpent, with Asher, light in the darkness, and Naphtali, special favor of God. It's a very short revision of these four. There's much more to say about it. But the prophet of Ezekiel would get the opportunity to also see four animals around the throne, like these four formations of Israel were situated around the tent, the holy tent, in the desert. We're talking about, when was this? This is 1200 years before Common Era, in the Bronze Era, which was transitioning into the Iron Era. I say this because realize that this was God's choice to make himself known in these symbols, in these imaginations, at that time, not earlier, in the Stone Age or earlier than that, to people, or in our time, the era of laser technology and nuclear knowledge. It was the people in the Bronze time, the beginning of Israel as people. They needed to know. They were open to receive this, and they were willing to proclaim this. From that time on, that Israel was a people, and in that role, growing in that role, heaven needed to be carried with them. Sounds a little bit weird, but that's what it was. When you have a tent and God meets Moses, and you fold the tent and you bind it up and you put it on a transportable construction, and you carry it with you and you build it up against stuff like that. Why was that? Why was that so important? Of course, to know that there is more than we can see, but also we have no tent now and no temple, so what? Why was it? It was a temporary situation in order to teach Israel and to imprint on their souls their common soul, this existence of God in the heavenly places. There needed to be an openness for the invisible, the now invisible world for most of us. And each service in the synagogue, first in the tent, then later on in the temple, and now in the synagogues, each service is a sort of a repetition of this so important cosmic visit of God on earth. But not only in the services. In the time of Moses, the service was only for the few priests. It's always the population on each day of the week that need to be able and more knowledgeable to make something visible of heaven in their lives. It's the people who do this. It's the leaders who are giving the good example, you hope, and in this time it was so. And then the people who practice this and make this a reality, with the tabernacle and the temple as basis and inspiration, source of inspiration, and in the first place with Moses on Mount Sinai. Tomorrow evening, the feast of this revelation on this Mount Sinai and the giving of Torah is celebrated by all of Israel, and a week later by Christian churches. Why a week later? It's their choice to change the dates. But tomorrow night, the biblical date is there, and interesting to see that the Feast of Pentecost is originally this receiving this heavenly present of the law of Moses, the remembrance of it, but also the knowledge and the what shall I say, the conscious choice to apply that in our lives, as Yeshua has constantly taught and proclaimed and lived as example. So it's the biblical commandment that is then given to us after 50 days of counting, which is also a biblical command. And in the reading, you see that Judah had to be in the east. You can see that in chapter 2, we go one chapter back, Numbers chapter 2, verse 3, it says, those who encamp on the east, which is the biblical, what we call the north. It was the east in the biblical language, toward the sun, and not only in the biblical language, but also in the language now, where the word east is used in expressions when you say in Hebrew, come on, let's go. Kadima, where the word kedem, which also means east, is there, is present. So the text, those who encamp on the east side toward the sunrise shall be of the standard of the camp of Judah, according to their divisions. Lion of Judah. The prince of the children of Judah shall be Nachshon, the son of Aminadav. There is this Judah. He is in line with Abraham. After Judah, after generations, David comes on the scene, and in the same line, Yeshua, Messiah, comes on the world stage. That's the great red line that you see, the punchline that you see in the Bible. It's this is also the reason that Judah is in the east, because the east is where the opening of the tent, the Mishkan, this desert shrine, was situated. The opening was to the east, the hope, the opening of the temple. The opening of the paradise was also east. It's the opening to where God comes from. In other words, it's the place where we left paradise, read in Genesis, and where we will go and enter paradise again. This road, Abraham, Moses, then Judah, not Moses literally, but Judah, David, and Yeshua, is the road on which you need to learn to walk. That road. Yeshua talks about that in John chapter 14, verse 6. I read, Yeshua said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. A quick explanation is that he talks about his way of saving us through giving his life. But this way is what I'm explaining. I am the way. Which way? The way of Abraham, David, Judah, David, and Messiah is the line, is the way, is the manner in which these men of God lived their lives. And Yeshua says, I am on that same way, on that same road. I also love the law, the Torah of Moses. In Matthew 5, verse 17, he says that. And he says in chapter 5, verse 19, 2 verses further on, that we all should keep that same law. Then we are also on that road, which is called Yeshua. I am the road. I am the truth. I am life. I am embodying it. No one comes to the Father than through me and through this road that you need to go on. Direction of our place of origin, direction also of old, and also of the future. It's direction toward God. Each tribe has its own position in the camp. Judah, where the name Jews comes from, and the other tribes behind him, and then the nations who are joining and recognize Yeshua as the Jewish Messiah with them, with us, working together as a body to serve God as a temple. The New Testament says, and rabbis have said before that. So each has his and her place in a, if you are part of that, in a congregation. Otherwise, you do it on your own, and you realize that you're part of a worldwide, also over the ages, body of Messiah. You belong to that which is very rich. Israel has different descriptions, temple, body, bride in the Bible. And believers from the nations belong. They belong and they can join if they have this attitude that Ruth shows in the Bible, which is an interesting book to read. Israel is growing into unity as a people, with people who want to grow furthermore, and also people who fall away. And then everyone, each of us, go through these stages that these titles of these 4 Bible books are showing us. Who lives in the desert has the disadvantage of difficulties, but the advantage of time to think. If you utilize the time well, Israel had the time, they took the time, they used the time. And they, especially going through these deserts, these deserts that I mentioned, Sinai and Kadesh Barnea, and to the plains of Moab and stuff like that. And constantly the temple is mentioned, and this tent is mentioned as replacement of this unique visit of God, this meeting of God on this Mount Sinai between God and human being Moses. If we utilize our times in our deserts where we are in sometimes, and we focus on this temple, then spiritually seen, we belong to this temple, I said, and we will grow against oppression. Let's read the second text of today. Haftarah text is Hosea chapter 2, Hosea chapter 2, verse 14 through 16. Therefore, behold, I will allure Israel. I will bring her into the wilderness, again, and speak tenderly to her. That's interesting, because if you read the first verses in this chapter 2, it's not so nice what Israel has done. And then God's so forgiving. I was talking about grace. This book talks about that grace. I will speak tenderly to her. I will give her vineyards from there, and the valley of Achor, we'll talk about that, as door of hope, which is very interesting if you know what the valley of Achor in Hebrew means. She will respond there as in the days of her youth, and as in the day when she came up out of the land of Egypt. It will be in that day, says God Adonai, that you will call me my husband and no longer my master. Read Hosea and you see the difficulties and the problems and the wrong decisions and acts that Israel went through. Place your own name in that text and realize that if you personalize things in the Bible and say, oh, this is for me, do it also with the wrong things, because then you can also enjoy the blessings that come afterwards, and then you can experience the grace that is written there for ourselves, because we're no better. We're no better than anybody else. We're all sinners. There's no one good in the Bible. In the Bible, it says that. And then, so Hosea comes then with this beautiful promise that it will be okay. That is to say, you come to a place which is called a door. You need to open that door. It's not just say, oh, nice door, thank you very much, bye. No, you need to open the door, you need to go through the door and then find healing, deliverance. Deliverance of what? I have everything I need, I don't need deliverance. Deliverance of a faith, trusting faith that you might not even recognize in your thinking anymore. Is there a place in Israel that is the real geographical valley of Achor? Yes. This Achor valley is not far away from Jericho and Gilgal, at the border of Judah and Benjamin. It's southwest of the city of Jericho, which you will pass when you take the road 1 from Jerusalem to the east. Direction of the Dead Sea, and you go then north, you will see Jericho on your left. In the close to the Wadi Daber. It was in this valley of Achor that Achan was stoned to death. Joshua does this. Not a nice story, but it was a situation of honesty and of high expectations. The word means something like problems, sorrow. And so it became that was the meaning of that name. That's what had become like that. And so it's very interesting that this prophet says it will change. It will not be anymore this place of tears, but it will become the place of hope and of beautiful situation. That, my friends, is an interesting change from the beginning of those 4 books in the Bible, and perhaps the situation in your own life. The prophets use that name when they talk about new renewal and hope. In Isaiah 65:10 you see the same. Let's read it. Isaiah 65:10 it says, Sharon shall be fold of flocks. That's a nice thing for a farmer. And the valley of Achor will become a place for herds to lie down in, for my people who have sought me. You need to seek God in order for these things to take place. How about Hosea chapter 2 verse 19 and 20? I will make you my bride forever. Yes, I will make you my bride, Israel, by righteousness, justice, in loving kindness and with compassion. And I will make you my bride in a faithful way. And you shall really know Adonai. What a promise. Don't ever think that God has forgotten about Israel. On the contrary. So there is a change, a good change when there is desert around you. This is the promise that will take place. The date is not there. The date is not there. Israel and soulmates become God's bride. Firstborns. We started the text in this book with the firstborns that take the place of the physical firstborns. Firstborn, become a firstborn, the Bible says. And then you will be searching for a renewal and searching for hope, because that is your fuel for now and the future. So let's go to the door of hope, which is not the solution, it's the beginning of our solution. And the name of that door is called Yeshua. He himself calls himself the door. Hosea is an evangelist. He talks about Messiah in covert terms, but he does it. And he proclaims that and predicts that there will be many days before real restorations will take place. You find this, there's no text for it on the screen, but you find this in Hosea chapter 4 verse 4. Very interesting text, read it please, because this could explain why it takes so long for Messiah to come. The 2,000 years that we're waiting for Messiah to return. But there will be restoration, says Hosea in chapter 3 verse 5. Read it. Afterwards the children of Israel shall return and seek Adonai their God and David their king. There's that line again. The punchline. And they shall come with trembling to Adonai. Philippians 2 verse 12. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling, and to his blessings in the last days. Don't think that it's trembling because of this sinful, disobedient people that Israel is. No, on the contrary, it's the same fear and trembling that Paul talks about in Philippians 2 verse 12. A second David will come, according to Hosea, the Messiah, son of David. Hosea speaks about Israel as a loved, beloved child of the Lord, with a messianic punch in the text, where it says in Hosea 11 verse 1, when Israel was a child, then I loved him and called my son out of Egypt. So this pun almost was recognized by Matthew in the New Testament and used when Joseph brought the small child Yeshua and his mother Miriam to Egypt to flee from the bad leaders at the time. There haven't been bad leaders now only, they have also been there in those times. Yeshua knows the prophets. He knows the prophecies of this Hosea prophet, and he quotes him. The text in Hosea 6 verse 6, I'll read it, he quotes. Hosea 6:6 says, I desire mercy, says God, and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. And Yeshua quotes that in Matthew chapter 12 verse 7, where it says, If you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, then you would not have condemned the guiltless. This is what Yeshua says. He's talking to people who are not respectful to other people, which is so important. It's a good teacher, this Yeshua. People needed to know and need to know about God. They need to have knowledge regarding God. The last text is to be found in John chapter 3, verse 22 through verse 29. Let's read it. After these things, Yeshua came with his disciples into the land of Judea. He stayed there with them and baptized. Jochanan, John the Baptist, also was baptizing in the city of Enaim near Shalem. Interesting names. Enaim means wells, springs, because there was so much water, it says in the text, near Shalem. Paid for, something like that, or peaceful, made whole. These two names are very interesting spiritually speaking, because they talk about finding your source of life in order to become healed. They came and they were baptized, for Jochanan was not yet thrown into prison. There arose therefore a questioning on the part of Jochanan's disciples with someone from Judea about ceremonial washing, purification. They came to Jochanan and they said to him, Rabbi, he who was with you, Yeshua, on the other side of the Jordan River, to whom you have testified, behold, it is he who baptizes also. He starts his own congregation, and everyone is coming to him. Jochanan answered, a man can receive nothing unless it has been given him from heaven. I promised I would get back to this text, which I'm doing now. You yourselves testify that I said that I am not the Messiah, but I have been sent before him. He who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly because of the bridegroom's voice. Therefore my joy is made full. Interesting that Jochanan says that, because all firstborns need to learn to recognize the voice of the bridegroom. Song of Songs talks about this as well. So Jochanan is very modest. He's baptizing, but he sends people to their homes again, to their villages again. He was not there to start a sect, a group, congregation or something like that. That was not his calling. It's very important to know your calling and not do something because it's the thing to do these days. It's nice, new, and people will flock to you because it's the new thing. Because you will cause division if you do it with the wrong motivation. But he baptizes as an important step in the lives of his audience. Yeshua collects students and he keeps them with him, sends them on a journey, but they come back to him. Jochanan expects Messiah. Yeshua puts the brakes on it and says it's not the time for this peace kingdom. Students of Jochanan, John the Baptist, come asking if Yeshua is Messiah. Yeshua answers that he has healed people from their blindness and from being paralyzed. The kingdom is there already. At least it's visible, but it's not there in the way it can be with the palace and the king in person. With Jochanan it goes about teaching and the baptism of purification. But with Yeshua it's also where we need to learn to recognize his voice among all these voices around us and inside us, like we read in verse 29. Read it again. I'm not reading it anymore, but this is this text where Jochanan is teaching that he is so glad that he recognizes his voice. Firstborn people are who learn to recognize the voice of Yeshua, or are busy learning to recognize it. Firstborns are searching for results now, not vague messages with beautiful words, but reality. The students of Rabbi John the Baptist are jealous that Rabbi Yeshua is having more students, more followers. John understands, and he says that you can only receive something when heaven gives it to you. That means that we need to be open for heaven to give something to us. We need to be able to receive, and we need to allow heaven to become visible into our lives. And we need to listen to what God wants on a very personal level. John needs to leave. He needs to become smaller. Yeshua needs to become bigger, which is for all of us the situation. John says, don't come to me. I just did my thing. You need to learn to have the Messianic Jewish character of your life. That needs to grow. Follow Yeshua, which Hosea already announced him years before. Moses proclaimed him already. On Mount Sinai, Moshe learned heavenly matters. He was an earthly man. He learned from God himself, from Messiah, in a very special presence, existence there, what was taking place. So we need to make heaven visible in ourselves. And we need to realize that there is a text in the Bible that says that the earthly things are important around us, but the heavenly things are more important. Moses was the man who received from God, from heaven, but Moses himself is lower than Yeshua. And in John 3 verse 31, it is John the Baptist who confirms this. Let's read John 3 verse 31. The person who is from a higher place stands above all of us. He who stems from the earthly line, Moses, is from the earth, or in this case it's himself, and speaks from the earth. He recognizes as Yeshua from the higher place, meaning from heaven. A very interesting situation that he recognizes what we all need to recognize, the difference between earth and heaven. Yeshua is from heaven and therefore needs to have a very specific place in all of our lives. Torah is the document that is given from heaven, should have this special place in our lives. We need to have this door of hope. We need to open that door, and our choice and our expectations need to be adjusted to what is realistic. Israel goes through the same thing. Israel is bombarded by rockets. That's how this thing started. First on the Temple Mount, where Palestinians were throwing rocks. Police comes in. This was all pre-planned, and then immediately rockets from Gaza to Israel. That's how it started. Yet Israel has hope. Young people in Israel have hope. I want to finish with a short movie. It's very short, it's only 15 seconds or something, like 20 seconds. But it shows you that there is hope in Israel, and there is, and it will all be good again, because God is in control, but there will be victims. People die on the Palestinian side, on the Jewish side. This is how it goes when you have this bad leadership in Palestinians camp, who are enriching their own pockets and at the cost of their own population. Let's look at this short movie for the time, and then I'll come back and tell you what it is. I need to tell you that these are people who are either helping the army of Israel, or they are people who are soldiers from the different divisions and platoons introducing themselves and telling you where they're from and wishing us Shabbat Shalom, and then I'll come back at the end. Let's look at it.
Hi everyone, we're Course Torah and we're wishing you a relaxing weekend and
אנחנו חיילי פלס"ר 401.
הבקשיות של משט אשדוד מאחלות לכם.
אנחנו מפקדי גדוד שקד של חטיבת גבעתי.
אנחנו מחלק קצינים של חטיבת גולני.
לוחמי חטיבת חילוץ והצלה מאחלים לכם.
אנחנו חיילי גדוד שמשון.
רוצים לאחל לכולם
שבת שלום.
שבת שלום. שבת שלום.
שבת שלום.
שבת שלום.
Wonderful to see these people not losing their hope with faces that are shining light. It's so different when you look at people, see the differences, look for the heavenly hope. Also in your own life, it's there. I pray for you that you will have this hope and that you will see the light on the other side of the tunnel. It's very important to keep that hope, which gives you a future to live for. Shabbat Shalom, as they said. Tomorrow night, the feast of Pentecost, as it's called in English, the feast of the giving of Torah will start. And may God be with you and protect you. Shabbat Shalom.